Hey everyone, I'm Simisola, and today I'm going to tell you about a couple who got married, went home to sleep in their own bed, and woke up to police officers raiding their bedroom at 2 in the morning. Their crime? Being married to each other. This is the story of Richard and Mildred Loving, and yes, that's really their last name, and how their love literally changed the law. July 11th, 1958. Washington, D.C. Richard Loving, a white man, and Mildred Jeter, a black woman, got married. They were in love. They wanted to spend their lives together. They wanted to start a family. So they did what millions of couples do. They got married. Then they drove home to Virginia to begin their life together. 5 weeks later, police officers burst into their bedroom in the middle of the night with flashlights and arrest warrants. Richard and Mildred were literally asleep in bed when the cops surrounded them. The charge? Violating Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924. In Virginia, it was illegal for white people and black people to marry each other. Not just frowned upon, not just socially unacceptable, illegal, a crime, punishable by prison. The police demanded proof that they were married. Mildred pointed to the marriage certificate hanging on the wall. That certificate, the one they hung up proudly in their bedroom, became evidence against them. The sheriff told them the Washington, D.C. marriage license didn't count in Virginia. They were criminals. They were arrested, thrown in jail, and told they'd be going to prison for violating the law. This wasn't just any law. This was a law that said their love was illegal, that their marriage was a crime against the state, that their mere existence as a married couple threatened society itself. Here's what makes this even more insane. Richard and Mildred had grown up together in Caroline County, Virginia. They'd known each other their whole lives. Their families knew each other. Everyone in their small community knew they were together. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't a scandal. They were just two people who loved each other. But when they made it official, when they got that piece of paper saying they were husband and wife, they became criminals overnight. Virginia law said any white person who married outside their race would be guilty of a felony and could be imprisoned for up to 5 years. 5 years in prison, for getting married, for loving someone. Richard and Mildred pleaded guilty. They didn't have much choice. The law was clear. They had broken it. Their lawyer worked out a deal with the judge. Judge Leon M. Bazile suspended their 1-year prison sentence on one condition. They had to leave Virginia and never return together for 25 years. Read that again. They were banished from their home state for 25 years. They could visit separately. Richard could visit his family, or Mildred could visit hers, but they could never be in Virginia together as a married couple. If they were caught together in Virginia, they'd go straight to prison. So Richard and Mildred packed up and moved to Washington, D.C., where interracial marriage was legal. They started their family there. They had 3 children there, but D.C. wasn't home. They missed their families. They missed the land they grew up on. They missed their community. Mildred was miserable. She hated living in the city. She wanted her children to grow up in the country like she did, running around outside, playing with their cousins, surrounded by family. So in 1963, 5 years after they'd been banished, Mildred wrote a letter. Not to a fancy lawyer, not to a politician. She wrote to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy asking for help. Kennedy referred her to the American Civil Liberties Union, and the ACLU assigned 2 young lawyers, Bernard S. Cohen and Philip J. Hirschkopf, to take their case. These lawyers were about to challenge laws that existed in 16 states across America. Laws that said if you married someone of a different race, you were a criminal. The lawyers filed a motion asking the original judge to vacate the sentence. Remember Judge Bazile, the one who banished them? He refused, and in his refusal, he wrote something that shows you exactly what they were up against. He wrote, Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. This was a judge, in 1965, writing these words as an official court opinion, saying that God himself opposed interracial marriage and that the law was simply enforcing God's will. This is what Richard and Mildred were fighting against. The case went to the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals. That court upheld the conviction. They said Virginia's anti-miscegenation law, that's the legal term for bans on interracial marriage, was constitutional. So the lawyers appealed to the United States Supreme Court. and on December 12, 1966, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. Richard and Mildred's love story was about to be argued in the highest court in the land. Their lawyer, Bernard Cohen, made his argument simple and powerful. He told the court, "These are slavery laws, pure and simple." He argued that the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equal protection under the law, meant Virginia couldn't criminalize marriage based on race. The state of Virginia sent an assistant attorney general to defend the law. His argument? That states had the right to regulate marriage and that the Racial Integrity Act applied equally to everyone. White people couldn't marry black people, and black people couldn't marry white people, so it was perfectly equal. Nobody was being discriminated against because everyone was being restricted in the same way. The Supreme Court wasn't buying it. On June 12, 1967, 9 years after Richard and Mildred got married, the court issued its decision. It was unanimous. All 9 justices agreed. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote the opinion, and his words were clear and unambiguous. Marriage is one of the basic civil rights of man, fundamental to our very existence and survival. To deny this fundamental freedom on so unsupportable a basis as the racial classifications embodied in these statutes, classifications so directly subversive of the principle of equality at the heart of the 14th Amendment, is surely to deprive all the state's citizens of liberty without due process of law. The freedom to marry has long been recognized as one of the vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men. Loving v. Virginia struck down anti-miscegenation laws in 16 states. Overnight, interracial marriage became legal across the entire United States. Thousands of couples who had been living in fear of prosecution could suddenly live openly. Couples who had moved away from their homes could return. People who had been hiding their marriages could get marriage licenses. The decision didn't just affect Richard and Mildred, it affected every interracial couple in America. And here's the beautiful part. Richard and Mildred Loving didn't want to be activists. They didn't want to be symbols. They didn't want fame or attention. Richard told reporters he didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to be left alone to love his wife and raise his children in peace. Mildred said she wasn't trying to change the world. She just wanted to go home. But sometimes ordinary people doing ordinary things, like getting married and wanting to live in their hometown, end up changing everything. Richard and Mildred went back to Virginia. They built a house. They raised their children. They lived quietly. Richard died in 1975 in a car accident. Mildred lived until 2008. Before she died, she issued a statement on the 40th anniversary of the Loving decision supporting marriage equality for same-sex couples. She said, "I believe all Americans, no matter their race, no matter their sex, no matter their sexual orientation, should have that same freedom to marry. Government has no business imposing some people's religious beliefs over others. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what Loving and Loving are all about." Think about that for a second. In 1958, Richard and Mildred were criminals for sleeping in their own bed together. Police raided their home in the middle of the night. A judge told them to leave their home state for 25 years or go to prison. And 50 years later, their case became the foundation for the fight for marriage equality. When the Supreme Court considered same-sex marriage in Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, lawyers cited Loving v. Virginia. They quoted Chief Justice Warren's words about marriage being a fundamental right. They argued that just like Virginia couldn't ban interracial marriage, states couldn't ban same-sex marriage. The principle was the same. The government doesn't get to decide who you're allowed to love and marry based on arbitrary classifications. The story of Richard and Mildred Loving is a reminder that the law doesn't always reflect justice. Sometimes the law is deeply, fundamentally wrong, and sometimes ordinary people who just want to live their lives end up being the ones who force the law to change. They didn't set out to be heroes. They just refused to accept that their love was illegal. They fought back not because they wanted to make history, but because they wanted to go home. And in fighting for themselves, they changed the law for millions of others. June 12th, the day the Supreme Court issued its decision, is now celebrated as Loving Day. It's a day to remember that not very long ago, people were arrested for marrying someone of a different race. It's a day to celebrate how far we've come, and it's a day to remember that progress happens because ordinary people refuse to accept injustice, even when the law says they have to. If you want more stories about people who challenged unjust laws and changed the world, subscribe to this channel. These aren't just history lessons. They're reminders that laws can be wrong, systems can change, and sometimes love really does win. And if you're facing legal questions that matter to you, contact a lawyer who can help you fight for what's right.